I said, my God, what's the talk tonight? Marcia Gray is here.
Hello, good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Hi. Well, yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight to the U of A's Science Cafe here at Saddlebrook. Unfortunately, this is our last one of this season, but we are very excited to say that we're going to be coming back in the fall with hopefully some presenters from the molecular and cellular biology department. So more information to come, and once I know more, I'll send the information to Darby, and then we'll get that all distributed and whatnot. Now, without further ado, most of you know me. My name is Samantha Pierce. I work for the College of Science through the Office of Recruitment and Engagement. I'm one of the program coordinators. And that's a really fancy title to say I get to come out and do fun things like this and basically show off all of the cool research going on within our college, within our different departments, and then speak to some really great accomplishments of our professors. Just a few quick announcements before we get started. We are continuing with our series, Mysteries Revealed, Discoveries in Chemistry. And thank you so much to Saddlebrook and the Desert View Performing Arts Center for having us here and allowing us to come and present all of our research and show off all of our cool professors and show why the U of A is a research-one institution. Just a quick reminder of today's format. I'm going to present our presenter, Dr. Hruby From there, we'll do about 15 minutes of Q&A, and we do have evaluations in the back. Your evaluations help us in better facilitating these talks and giving more and speaking to topics that you all are interested in. If you are interested in receiving notifications about the upcoming Science Cafes, not only here at Saddlebrook, but at our other 4 venues, you can definitely put your email address at the bottom of that evaluation, and I send out the notices once a month. This is a free and for the public event. All of our Science Cafes are, so it's never a matter of asking of money or anything like that. It's just science outreach and community engagement. For those of you who don't know, we do have 4 other Science Cafe venues. They will be having talks in April and in May. So if you're able to get out to Tillamook Hill, to some Botanical Gardens, Borderland Burlings, or Mac Place Pizza, we do have talks, and there's more information on the brochures out front. I did also bring our University of Arizona College of Science Arizona Daily Star. That's a really long name for the newspaper out there. Basically showcasing all of our different research within the departments as well. And again, all of the information regarding our other outreach facilities is out front as well. So Biosphere 2, Tillamook Hill, Tree Ring Lab, and the Mirror Lab. I'm sure most of you have heard of those. Most of you have probably taken more than one of our brochures up front. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. And that's enough announcements. Let's talk about the professor now. So tonight presenting is Dr. Victor Hruby, a Regents Professor for the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry here at the U of A. Tonight we will be presenting the chemistry of human behavior. And there is more information regarding the chemistry department out front. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions. If I don't know, I will get you in touch with someone who does know. Some background information about Dr. Hruby. He received his Bachelor's of Science from the University of North Dakota in 1960 in both chemistry and math. His Master's of Science in 1962 from the University of North Dakota in chemistry, and his PhD in 1965 from Cornell University. He has been with the University of Arizona since 1968.
Wow.
His research at the U of A is interested in the design, synthesis, analysis, and structure activity relationships of active peptides with interest in hormones and neurotransmitters that affect the human behavior. His research is the rationale design of inhibitors in hormone and neurotransmitters in brain chemistry, and it is seeking to understand the physical chemical basis of information transduction of these important molecules in biological systems. He will go into more details. I had the pleasure of riding up to Saddlebrook today with Dr. Hruby, and I learned some fun facts. There is a cookbook named after the Hruby family, and he did mention that he is an amazing cook, and if he wasn't a chemist, he would have been a cook. And he did also mention he was one of the first people to visit China after the Cultural Revolution. So his career and his research has literally taken him all over the world. Tonight, Dr. Hruby will discuss the different types of cells in our bodies that must communicate with each other, especially in the brain. Much of this intercellular communication is done by peptide hormones and neurotransmitters. These interactions then lead to changes in the cell's function. A breakdown in these communications, either directly or indirectly, may lead to the degenerative diseases of the mind and body, such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, most mental disorders, pain, addiction. That's enough of me talking. Please help me welcome Dr. Hruby tonight.
Oh, I'm supposed to be hooked up. Hear me? Okay, good. I have a loud voice, so I'll have to quiet down now that I am hooked up. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank Samantha for inviting me to be part of this series. It's a great pleasure to get a chance to tell you about some of the work we've been doing during my 50-plus years here at the U of A. I've had fantastic students, colleagues. I've published with almost 57 other professors and students all around the world, so it's been really fantastic life. Okay, I'm going to talk about the chemistry of human behavior. It's a new subject. We haven't been able to study the chemistry of human behavior, but of course you all know that human behavior has fascinated human beings since the dawn of human history, and I'm sure many centuries and millennia before. There was even a culture. So it's been one of the most fascinating things because despite all of the efforts we've made to control human behavior, we still have a lot of trouble doing it, as we all know. So, what's new about this? And that is that it's only been very recently since we had what is called the molecular biology revolution, which has all happened during most of the people's lifetime in this audience. So it started about 50 years ago, when I just was starting as a professor here. So it's been something that's only become possible recently to actually study human behavior from a scientific point of view, as opposed to all the other points of view we have, which are religion, culture, law, etc., politics, you name it. Everything, every field, every part of human behavior is somewhere an effort to modulate, control, or otherwise deal with human behavior, right? This is just the way it is. Okay, so human behavior is very complex, as we all know. And historically it's been dealt with only recently with science, but with philosophy, art, mathematics, religion, and so forth. Our brains are very similar to our nearest neighbors. There isn't much difference between your brain and that of a rat. However, these behaviors are very different from a rat. At least we think they are. And so, you have to deal with this. And how do we deal with it? Scientifically. That's what we're going to try to do today. As I said, the molecular biology revolution is what changed everything about biology and medicine. Because, what did it say? That life is a biological and chemical process. And we have to understand the chemistry of it. And so eventually this got to places where we could start understanding the chemistry of human behavior, or at least we could think we might be able to do that. So I'm going to tell you what I think we can do, and you might have lots of other ideas, and I hope you'll tell me about them in the question and answer period. Okay. So, what have we learned there? Let me try to get into that. So first of all, what are the possible hypotheses about human behavior? And basically, from a perspective of a scientist, you take three perspectives. The classical one, which had to do with the constant battle between good and evil, which was what dominated philosophical thought from the dawn of philosophy, religious thought from the dawn of religion, and so forth. Then we have a more modern context, and we say that human nature, culture, and societies are complex, and good and evil are relative. So all human behavior is acceptable if it can be justified. And so we find all kinds of ways nowadays in modern society to justify whatever we do, good or bad. Okay, now, from the standpoint of biological and therefore chemical aspect, we say human behavior is a complex emergent property of our biological self under evolutionary constraints. Good and bad behavior is a habit, subject to the brain and mind. The brain and mind are not the same thing. We know quite a bit about the brain now, we know virtually nothing about the mind. We all say we have one, but what is it? Okay, so how should we look at good human behavior? And I say historically we have these things, and now we have chemistry to start asking that question about the difference between good and bad behavior. What's the chemical consequences thereof? How do we change chemically when we act good and when we act bad? Is the brain the same or different? And so forth. These are things we can know. Now, one of the things that people have tried to do is to, and I just put down one of the more recent aspects of human beings to try to define good and bad. I mean, we have things called the 10 Commandments. right? We have things that are like the 7 Greek virtues and vices, and we have things like Sermon on the Mount, or Confucius's ideas about becoming one with the universe. But here's Franklin's. I kind of like his because he makes it very practical. And you think the 10 Commandments are practical? Anyway, okay. He says, but if you want to be a virtuous person, here's what you have to practice: chastity, cleanliness, frugality, humility, industry, justice, moderation, order, resolution, silence, sincerity, temperance, and tranquility. And he wrote this when he was 21 years old. Okay, so this is what he said he was going to try to do with his life, to practice these virtues. And he did. And he became one of the greatest scientists, one of the greatest writers, and so on and so forth, diplomats and everything else. Franklin was a polymath of the highest order of magnitude. I'm sure you all realize that. Probably the greatest American, at least in my opinion. Okay, now, what can science do about this? Okay, so we can look at this from, science can start looking at this from the cultural concepts, customs, religious, social, legal, scientific. All of these fit in to the last part, which is the scientific studies of human behavior, which involve fields such as sociology, psychology, chemistry, physics, drugs, and so forth. But the scientific aspects now are something that have become something that we can actually delve specifically into what you might call cause and effect from a scientific point. Now, I could say a lot about the brain, but I'm not going to say very much, just a few simple things to point out. First of all, the brain is an incredibly complex organ, by far the most complex organ that we know in the world, in the universe for that matter. So I just showed the typical ways in which the brain is split up into pieces by biologists for various purposes. So this is just the various lobes in the brain. And then you can start adding things that happen in these various lobes. And notice, immediately what you do is that the different things we call behavior don't happen over the whole brain, they just happen in certain parts of the brain. And then I can just keep on going like this. And there are now maps that people have put out in biology and medicine, which have 150 or 250 such things that happen in our behavior that are located in this part of the brain or that or that or that. Okay? So we can break it down, but so what? Just because we can break it down, does this mean we understand what's happening? So for example, when we come to the neuroanatomy or the limbic node, it's involved in learning higher cognition functions. How do you split these up in terms of human behavior? What does it mean to say we are cognitive when we behave? How can we define this? How can we deal with it? How can we scientifically examine it? So that's what I want to try to get to today as best I can. Now, since the dawn of human history, in fact, if you go back now that we know this, chemicals have been a very important part of human behavior since the dawn of human history. So things like alcohol, hallucinogens, nicotine, caffeine, morphine, heroin, on and on I could go with the things that society has developed to modify our behavior that are chemicals, right? And these chemicals affect behavior, and they've been very important in our societies. They've been involved in our cultural events and our religious events. And all of these things, we use these mind-altering substances for various purposes that we consider good. But in almost all cases, they can also lead to bad. How is this? What is the chemistry that can be either good or bad? Well, we've had these since the dawn of human history, so it's not like we're suddenly discovering something that we didn't know existed. It's just that we're discovering how and why and what is the chemistry of what is happening. So that's what we've been trying to do. I can assure you it's not easy. Okay, now the first thing we have to do is, so what are we going to observe? And what are the hypotheses about what we observe and its relationship to chemistry? So special behaviors like cognitive, speech, art, music, science, culture have emerged from genetic differences of only a few % from our nearest neighbors. So we can go study our neighbors. How do rats behave? And how do dogs behave? And so forth. And we study it in great detail. But we like to still think, especially because of those first things called cognition, that we humans are special, right? Are we? Is our chemistry special? Is it really that different? And as the more and more we study this, we find that we're not as different as we like to imagine ourselves. That's one conclusion that I'm going to give you as a general thing. And you can ask questions about it as you choose after I tell you a lot more about what we're studying. So we feel that these changes are a result of very minor changes in structure, which are new and unpredictable. So we have to find out scientifically how we discern what's really going on. Now, I also have to point out that there's different kinds of human behavior. And you have to study these differently, right? So let's take first involuntary, things that we do because we're human beings. I've just listed them here. I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but you can see that there's an enormous amount of things that just happen, and their behavior, and you can change them. Then you have things that are voluntary, like learning, eating, drinking, sexual, pain, aggression, addiction, athletics, etc. Right? These are things that some people do and some people don't. Some people do well, some people do poorly, and so on and so forth. Why? What's the difference? If I can be an all-star basketball player, if I can't even get the ball into the basket. So these are the kinds of things that we have to ask when we start thinking about these things. And then, even more difficult, cognitive behaviors. Compassion, love, hatred, peace, arrogance, musicality, jealousy, all of these cognitive things. What's the chemistry involved there? How do we find out? What can we do once we find out? Or what should we do? These are all the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves as scientists as we try to study this. Now, here's some of the things that we are currently actually studying. I can't talk about all of them, but I can at least list them, right? Addictive behaviors. This is a big topic now because we're having the opiate epidemic, right? And so there's lots of things going on. And then, from a person who happens to be pretty expert in this particular area, I'm going to say the way we've gone about the opiate epidemic has been very stupid. I'm sorry. Both from a medical professional point of view and from the cultural point of view. But that's just my scientists talking, because I realize people are people. They're going to behave the way they behave. And then we have pain behaviors. I mean, pain is the most ubiquitous disease in the world. The opiate epidemic is in part because of pain, right? Due to that. But then there's all these other cognitive things that come into play with how you deal with pain. And that's what leads to all of these other behavioral things. So pain behaviors are very complex from the standpoint of what they eventually lead to in terms of human behavior. Depression and related so-called diseases of the brain. What are they? What's changed in the brain that this happens? Why are they so different in different people? Etc. These are all questions that we now can, in principle, address scientifically. The same with aggressive behaviors, learning behaviors, and so forth. So we have many, many opportunities. But how can we go about doing this so we actually learn anything? Okay, so let's just talk about this in view of, for example, drug abuse. As you know, in this area, which goes back to the dawn of human history, drug abuse has been something that's been part of human behavior since the dawn of human history. Okay, so it's not something new. Not something new at all. It's been around. Read those oldest texts in the world, you'll find comments about these kinds of behavior, of these addictive behaviors that happen because of what they had available at the time. So, what's interesting about this, as I say here, the consequences, we cannot hope or will it away. It is a biomedical basis, and effective treatment requires strategy built on science-based knowledge of behavior and pharmacological treatments. So we have treatments for these, but they don't work in most people. They just work for episodically for some people. And we have, what now, 60-some drugs on the market for mental diseases. So it's been a real interesting developments as how we try to deal with this, right? Just throw out a whole bunch of chemicals and hope that something good happens. I mean, that's one way to look at it. You can also say it's fantastic science and we're really starting to delve into this. But you have to understand again that the way that we react to this has to do with our attitudes and behavior. So it's kind of like an endless circle that we have to try to integrate into something specific. Because the idea in science is to have a specific answer. So what is discovery in science? You ever thought about this? What do we mean when we say we've discovered something? In science, we're interested in what is. So, discovery in science is basically seeing something for the first time that already is. And the problem has been with human behavior. What is? Okay, so this is just going to be one thing with the dopamine receptors. It just shows you when you get a chronic cocaine user how your brain changes. So we know what is leads to changes in the brain when we become addicted to cocaine. And you can do this for all kinds of different drugs that affect brain. And you find it changes the brain in different ways in every single one of them. And sometimes if you take two brains, you change this brain differently than you change that brain. So we can do this now. We can image the brains of everybody, but still, unfortunately, no conclusion, right? We just have episodic knowledge, it's called, right? This particular person, this part of the brain is affected. With this particular person, that part of the brain is affected. Why are they different? We don't have any idea. But that doesn't mean we're not keep trying. So how do we go about designing a drug to affect human behavior? And here's kind of the general outline of what we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. Hopefully better and better, but this is still basically the same idea that we already had 30 years ago about how to go about doing this. First of all, you have to define it. What are you going to study? Feeding, learning, pain. Whatever you're going to study, you have to define it, and you have to measure it somehow. In science, we always have to measure something, right? Develop an assay that defines the behavior. So how much the animal eats, how much it learns at a particular task, and so forth. You know, just the usual things that you've already heard about many times for many different kinds of behaviors. Then you find a molecule in nature or in a collection of molecules that you've made that modify that behavior. Then what you do is determine the site of action for the behavior, the tissue, the location of the tissue, the single cell, the single molecule, the complex of molecules that are involved. And all of our behaviors turn out to involve many molecules. You give a neurotransmitter in the brain, brain that affects some behavior, and you see, in the beginning, just a few changes in your expressed genome. But after you've taken this drug for a week, you see hundreds of changes. We understand why these changes occur. We don't even know why most of them occur. The early ones we can predict, because that's why we invented the drug. But why do all these other changes occur? What do they mean? This is still something we're trying to sort out. Because in the end, we have to really understand not just what happens now, but what happens if we start taking this drug, affect whatever behavior we're affecting for a day, or a week, or a month, or a year, or 30 years. And we don't know this. Now, so I've just listed some of the peptides that involve behaviors of different kinds. And I'm going to only talk about one of these tonight. I've done a lot of work on the ones that I have in yellow here. And I'm going to talk primarily about something you might not know much about. You've heard a lot about beta-endorphin because it's involved with pain. And it's in the newspapers all the time. But how many of you in the audience have heard about MSH? I think Brenda has, because she worked with me on this 25 years ago. But anyways, anybody else in the audience? Okay, a few others, right? And yet, it's the most ubiquitous hormone and neurotransmitter that's involved in our human behavior. So why haven't you heard about it? Well, this is an interesting thing about the way society works, right? It doesn't necessarily tell you about the things that are the most interesting, only the things that they think you want to hear, right? So I'm going to tell you about it. Not very much, but a little bit. We've been working on it for 40-some years, okay? So here's what it comes from. This is one of the primordial genes in animal life, all animals, insects, fish, lizards, humans, cows, you name it, okay? This receptors and this thing called melanocortin. And it's a very small protein, 137 amino acids. But yet it makes all these different hormones and several others by being specifically degraded in different parts of your brain or body to these specific molecules, which then have their specific effects on your behaviors. I'm going to tell you about all the different behaviors that are involved with this primordial gene. It's absolutely essential for your existence. These things aren't working, you'll be dead very quickly. Okay, so let me just tell you some of the things that are involved in these, and this is a very short list. It's now every month almost something new is being discovered about what this is involved in. So here's the MC1R. There are 5 receptors for these. 2 of these have been known for over 100 years, but all of them were cloned in the 90s. And when they cloned them, they discovered these 3 other receptors called MC3, 4, and 5. Okay, so they're involved in regulation of melanocyte pigmentation, hair color, but also they're involved in cancer and all sorts of other things. Okay, I'm just giving you the early discoveries of these. The adrenal cortex for the MC2 receptor reduced to producing glucocorticoids and fear and flight, which are both very important things in our behavior, our survival. Then we have the MC3R, which is found in the brain, placenta, also different parts of the body. It's involved in obesity, regulation of energy homeostasis, inflammation, and many other things. There is the MC4R receptor, virtually all brain areas, the cortex, thalamus, hypothalamus, brainstem. Minor cortex is involved in feeding behavior, obesity, and anorexia, sexual behavior, and many other things associated with our behavior. And then the peripheral tissues are where the MC5R, but it's also found in the brain. So it's found everywhere in the body, and this is the one we know the least about, even though it's found in the most places in the body. It's involved in things like thermoregulation, sebaceous gland secretion, and so forth. And you'll notice it uses different modes of regulation, even though it's all coming All of the ligands for them are coming from a single protein called POMC that I mentioned in the previous slide. Okay, so let me just give you one example of what you can do when you define molecules that are specific for one of these receptors, which we did in this particular case about 15 years ago. Okay, so if you give an agonist for this, which is called MT2, because it's been used for all kinds of other studies. It's just called melanotan-2, and I won't get into the history of this, but it's something we discovered about 20 years ago now. And then we also discovered shortly thereafter the first antagonist for the MC3 and MC4 receptors, which is called SHU9109. So I'm using the designations that are used by the biologists who study these things. So if you give them the hormone itself, MT2 is just a derivative of alpha MSH, and you get less feeding going on, and this is over a 12-hour period of feeding. But if you give them the antagonist, they return to basal levels. So you can block this feeding behavior by just blocking this one hormone from interacting with the brain. Both of these molecules cross the blood-brain barrier. And if you do this for 10 days, they lose weight. Big surprise. They eat less, they lose weight. Okay, so it works. So here's some behaviors that are associated. And I have 11 associated here, but the number now is about 60. And the new ones are being discovered every month. It's involved with this system that I just told you about. It involves these 5 receptors and this one precursor protein. Okay, so fear, flight, stretch, feeding, sexual, addiction, pain, attention learning, pigmentation, temperature control, kidney function, heart function, and so forth. In other words, how do you go about, now that you know that this is affecting all these behaviors, how do you find a treatment for one of those behaviors? The bodies find some way to do this because it's modulating all these behaviors with this one protein and these 5 receptors. But how can we find a way to do this? So this is what is called science, right? We have to discover ways in which we can do this. And so how are we going to go about trying to do this? That's what I'm just going to say a few words about. So, before I do though, I want to mention what happened when I started talking about this many years ago, when we first started on this. So, quite a few people came up to me and said, but Dr. Hruby, all of these things have fantastic implications for, religious culture, and so forth. And I said, it's certainly true that this is true. And us chemists, I said, are ill-prepared sometimes to really deal with all these other facts that I've just been mentioning. So here are some of the things that I think I've already mentioned to you that drugs that affect human behavior already, but do we really know the long-term effects on human creativity, productivity, health, and so forth? And we're starting to, because some of these drugs now we've used for a long time. If we take something like morphine, it's been used for several thousand years in human behavior. This epidemic we're having now is not something new. We already had epidemics like this in the Roman Empire, so using these kinds of compounds. So it's not like it's something new, but during the past 150s, we have polluted our biosphere to the point where we're starting to wonder whether we will survive the pollution we've created, right? Because of temperature warming and all these other changes that are occurring in our little tiny thing called the Earth. But how about what's going to happen if we start putting in all kinds of new chemicals that affect all of these behaviors I'm talking about? So this has raised some very difficult ethical questions, And since my minor in college was philosophy, I thought that maybe I should delve into this. So I was contacted by the Templeton Foundation. Maybe you've heard of it. The Templeton Foundation is very interested in the relation between science and religion and culture, right? And so they asked me, can you try to design a course in which you discuss not only the scientific aspects of this, but also these ethical aspects of this? So I designed a course called Scientific and Ethical Aspects of Modifying Human Behavior, which was a very popular course when I taught it for about 10 years. And it was not taken mostly by chemists, to be honest. It was mainly taken by people who were pre-meds and things like that that were really interested in this, people that were in religious studies and so forth. So it was a fun course to teach because of the diversity of the students. But you can see that, let's see, did I go too fast? Okay, so these are some of the questions that I discussed in this course, and I just want to mention them to you because they have been thought of. What behavior should be modified? What if new behaviors emerge, good or bad? Who will decide? Who will assess the risk? What will be the criteria given immense numbers? That is, when hundreds, thousands, millions of people start using these things. Who decides what is good or bad? Who will pay for it? Who will profit from it? How much control should an individual be given on their behavior? Of course, this has been a last thing, it's been a problem that has faced human beings since the dawn of human history, right? We throw people in jail for behaviors, things that we don't approve of. Often we throw good people in jail for behaviors that we thought we didn't approve of, but we found out we were wrong. So it's not just that we have a problem with the science, is that we have the problems of culture that we have to deal with. So human beings' different perspectives on what is good and what is bad. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides about the modern view of this, we can justify it as good, right? So, what are the implications for further research? Chemists and biologists can develop ligands that profoundly affect behavior. But what do we understand? We know that these ligands interact with one or more receptors or effectors to get information transduction. But then, something happens that we don't understand. Complex intercellular communication occurs. So our brain is very complex. Things start spreading all over you. You give a drug, it hits this receptor, this part of the brain. And then things go to this part and that part and that part. Now we can follow this, but often we don't know why or what happens because that happens. So this is a new area of science called information transduction. We know things change, but we don't know why or what the results are. And we have to start finding ways to measure this. So we can understand the precise chemical, biochemical changes that occur and how other stimulations, physical and biological events might intervene. But how the mind thought can affect this, we don't know. So these are the problems that we have to face. And now we have an additional problem that's been, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but it's important to realize now that we can take a cell from your body and we can evaluate all the genes and measure all the genes in that cell for a few $1,000s. And the thought is that we possibly will be able to do this for a few $100s within the very near future. So we can start looking at every gene that you have that's a human gene and how it's changed when we give you a drug, or you eat a piece of chicken, or you drink a bottle of Coke, or whatever. But, so we can measure it, and we can say that this changed. But what does this mean? And should we be allowed to get all this information when we clearly do not know what it means? So how do you parse out information, knowledge, and behavior? And be ethical about it at the same time. That is the question for every one of you. It's not just my question. If you don't start thinking about this, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. So, a major thing that I'm trying to, and you can read these things, and I got another whole slide of these kinds of questions that arise. But, you know, a simple person like me can think about, but you can probably think of 100 others. And we're doing this, right? Almost every year on the market, another handful of drugs that affect human behavior are coming on the market. And this is only going to accelerate. But are we properly modulated? Are we properly dealing with the unpredictable effects that are occurring as a result of this? And this is my message to you. Yes, we can study the chemistry of human behavior in very specific terms like I told you about. And I didn't give you all the scientific details, but we have papers published that are 20 pages long that have detail after detail after detail. Information that we now know that we didn't know, you know, a decade ago. But the question for you is, and for all of us, me too, so what? And what should we be allowing? And you're going to have to answer that question now. You've probably heard about some of the changes that are leading to these problems where chemists and biologists and medical doctors are meeting to try to sort out what are we even going to allow ourselves as scientists to do? What's ethical? What's right? What can we do? And how should we do it? So that we can be good human beings and not just smart human beings. Okay, so here's my conclusions of this talk from my perspective. First of all, what I call the law of unintended consequences is often a likely outcome. That is, we put a drug on the market for a certain behavior, but then all kinds of other things happen. Some good, some toxic, right? And sometimes they're taken off the market or they're only given to the person who has this effect rather than the person who develops that effect, right? This is happening every day as we talk about. The laws of unintended consequences. We invent something for a reason, and then it has all kinds of other consequences. This is true in drug design like in so many other things. The consequences of having television or an automobile or whatever. Secondly, ethical considerations are critical. We can't just say, well, it's really great science, so you don't have to think about what does it mean in terms of behavior and how we're going to respond to the effects of behavior. So all of society has to be involved. This is not just a scientific issue or an issue for philosophers or sociologists. It's an issue for every single citizen. And then, most importantly, and this is what you have to decide, who's going to control and define this? You just let us scientists in big trouble. Oh, I guess I have one last thing. That is, probably at this point is, from my perspective, no final conclusions, but at least these are the three that I thought you should at least think. Thank you very much. I did it in exactly 45 minutes, not really.
So we do have some time for Q&A. I know that there's a few types of ways that we're running Q&A. You're more than welcome to come down here, and so we can get all the sound feed into the YouTube, or if you're in the middle, I'm more than happy to take this over to you. Does anyone have any questions?
So theoretically, we could eliminate, by virtue of what you outlined, every criminal behavior that we can discover, or we decide is a criminal behavior.
If we can discover how it changes the brain, which is necessary to change our behavior. It's not so simple just saying, yes, we can discover what it does, but then we have to find out all these other consequences, right?
So theoretically, though, this would be a revolution in the area of criminal justice, because if you could find out chemically, by virtue of some treatment or some medication, how to prevent somebody from being a pedophile.
Yes.
Or somebody.
In principle, that's true.
Right, in principle, I'm saying, I don't know this, I wouldn't begin to know the science, but theoretically, it could be a revolution in criminal justice, because you could find a way to avoid almost every major type of, as you
Bad behavior.
Bad behavior. Is that correct?
Yes. But, as I said, who's going to define bad? And how is it going to be defined, and what are we going to do about it? And when? Should we be allowed to do anything? That is, I'm talking about a scientist now, not about criminal justice and all the other things, cultural things we have to deal with, right? I'm talking about us that are trying to make these molecules that will do this. Yes?
Dr. Hruby, my question is, so everything presented up here is causal and mechanistic. Does it leave any room for free will?
Very good question. I actually took out 2 slides I had about free will. So I'll say a few words here. Okay. So right now, from the philosophical point of view, this is, as you know, a big discussion about how free is our free will. And so that's one of the big issues about understanding behavior, because the extent to which our will is free depends on the extent to which our behavior is free. And this is where the dilemma comes in trying to deal with this. So in the end, that's why I say, all of you out here have to decide what you're going to allow us to do. Otherwise, we're going to do almost everything we can think of. And some of it's going to be good, and some of it's going to be bad. That we can almost be assured of. Because I can tell you of some of the things I've made, I would never want any human being to ever take it. Even though I've given it to mice or rats or dogs or something. So this is a real issue. And you have to, in some ways, the most important question. And we don't know, to be honest. At least I don't. Is there room for free will? Of course there is, because the question is, how free will it be? And what does that mean? And that's what the philosophers are arguing about now. But in terms of the way that historically we decided free will, that is, we say here's choice A and choice B. And we define one as good and one as bad. You have the will to do either this one or that. That's what we sort of define as free will historically. But the philosophers are saying it's not so easy, because a lot of the things that are behaviors are very complex relationships that we don't understand yet. So it depends on, if you just take this old definition of free will, fine. But if you take the more modern philosophical definitions, it's much more complex, because what we're finding now is that the biochemistry of this is very complex. So yes, we're looking at when you behave, to what extent can you, just because you want to change that behavior. And of course we know when you're addicted, Even though you try, you can't. So what does that mean? Has your free will been destroyed? So these kinds of questions are the ones that we have to deal with when it comes to free will. So that's why I took out the 2 slides, because it's too complicated to discuss. But since you asked, I'll tell you what I think, for what it's worth. Any other questions? Yes.
You know, I know you can't predict, but in the future, on the horizon, is there some behavior modification that you can see can happen?
Oh, so she asked, what are the things on the horizon that we will be able to deal with in terms of human behavior? Okay. So I'll tell you 2 things that are very certain, because they're already reaching stages of early clinical trials, or they will in the not too distant future. And this is feeding behavior. This has been something that people have been trying to give drugs for a long time. But now, with the real feeding behavior centers, the things that control energy homeostasis in your body, part of which I told you about here today, or gave you a little bit of an insight into what we're looking at. And the other one is sexual behavior. Because the way that we've dealt with sexual behavior is just sexual function. But that's not where sexual behavior occurs. Sexual behavior occurs up here in your spinal column. And that's what we're being able to change now. And we will be changing. The question again is, what should we change? So it's a very good question. But these are things that we can do now. They're there. You're going to have to deal with this in the not too distant future, because these questions will arise. Just the one you asked. Yes.
Are you talking now about what they used to call castration and chemical castration?
Oh, no. This has nothing to do with physical manipulation at all. This has to do with your mind. How we change your mind and your behavior. That's what the nature of my talk has been. No, I'm not talking about all the things you can do with medical, physical changes that you can make. No, I'm talking about the changes that your mind makes and that you can make in your mind to change your behavior. So this is something that's a relationship, what we call the mind-body problem. How does the mind and the body? Because one of the things we discovered, I don't know if I mentioned this in my introduction, but I often do, that is, what we have discovered is something very interesting. Every cell in your body that's functioning properly or improperly is doing this because of a relationship either directly or indirectly with the brain. Nothing happens in your body without the brain knowing it, or if it is, it's a disease. Yes.
Saying that the addictions are diseases of the brain. However, you can't be addicted unless you're exposed to the drug. Substance, for instance, are you saying that you're able to predict addiction without the necessity of having exposure to the agent?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. I said that addiction was I said that addiction was a problem of the brain's behavior. And that the brain now controls your behavior, addiction. And he asked the question, well, now can we predict who will become addicted by just looking at their brain? And the answer is no. We don't know enough about how the brain works, so we can go and take, unless we could take maybe 100 of your brain cells from different parts of your brain, if we knew how to do that without affecting you very much. We don't. But if we did, even if we did know how to do that, we still wouldn't know what to do. What I'm telling you is, in principle, what you say is possible, but in practice, we have a long ways to go. But yes, the principle is correct. But You tell me how you're going to do it. I don't know, and I don't know any of my colleagues around the world that know how to do this. I told you one way we can do it now, but we don't even know how to do that except in a rat or something. Because I can't go take 100 cells out of different parts of your brain and find out.
I wanted to ask you about conclusion 3.
About what?
Conclusion 3, who is going to control and define good behavior? And what area of academics is maybe best suited to try to answer that question? Is that going to come out of the liberal arts, out of the humanities, out of religious studies? Where's that going to come from?
Very interesting question. And also, what is going to be the answer is going to be dependent on how human behavior adjusts to this new reality. So what I'm saying is, historically, if you look at, you know, the great universities, they've been silos, right? There's the philosophers over here, the historians over here, the chemists over here, the physicists over here, the musicians over here, and so on. Architects over there, on and on I could go, right? With all the silos. But what I'm trying to tell you is, the silo is not going to do you any good. There's nobody smart enough in any silo, whether it's scientific, cultural, philosophical, ethical, religious, that has the answers. That's my opinion, okay? So if we don't work together, if you don't all work with us, you too, you know, we're going to keep on going like we have, making all kinds of stupid mistakes, or maybe they're not stupid, they're just ignorant mistakes. And so this is what the real problem is. How do we avoid stupidity and ignorance from getting in, from making whatever good things we try to do bad, right? It's a very important question. I mean, you raised the essential issue of human behavior, right? In some ways, this is the central issue. How do we get all of these different things that we have knowledge of and expertise in, but how do we get them to collectively do something that's better than any of them can do? That's what you want done, right? If I understood your question correctly. And you've asked a $1 million or $1 billion question. Honestly. No, if you have a way to, please tell me. I'd like to tell the president of the university. Yes.
Is there an ethical difference between castration and manipulation of a person's mind to deal with sexual predation?
Okay, first of all, I have to plead that I'm not an ethicist, okay? So you're asking a scientist to answer a question that I don't think that I'm qualified to answer, but since you asked it, I'll give you my opinion. It's not an answer, it's just an opinion. And the answer is, probably not. But, you know, that's all that one can say right at the moment, because we're just, from my perspective, there's not enough known to do something that you would call rational. So whatever you're going to do is going to be partially irrational. And that's what the problem is. Now, sometimes people do irrational things that are very useful, but often they do things that are irrational, that are very destructive, right? So, and you can't predict this on priority. And I'll say the same thing here. You know, we like to think that we're rational, but sometimes our rational thoughts lead to behaviors that aren't good. Does that ring any bells with you, or do you have other ways of looking at this that you had in mind?
Professor, over here.
Oh.
We were talking about who should help make decisions about the use of drugs.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
We were talking about who collectively should get together and decide, and in some ways, policymakers, in the absence of a collective will are trying to make those kind of decisions every day. I go back, now I think about prohibition as a wholly, in a completely different way. It's taking a certain drug away from us. That was sort of society trying to come to terms with what alcohol was doing to us as a society, and making decisions about chemistry in some ways. But today, the decisions that states are making about cannabis, policymakers having to come to terms with all the effects and the unintended consequences. Who's guiding our policymakers? Us.
Okay, there's two ways of looking at this. One has to do with political things that I feel totally unqualified to say what politics, because there's a political aspect of this which are, just from my perspective, impossible to deal with. But I'll tell you what sociologists are already doing with this, right? They're using the internet to get thousands, hundreds of thousands of people involved. So there are these new collective studies that are being done now. Maybe you've heard about them, that are being done, which we can now, instead of just having, 30 or 40 undergraduates, who we look at, we can now look at 1 million people around the entire globe and try to sort out some of these dilemmas. And so people are starting to do this now, to try to find ways to do the internet. And to be honest with you, the people who are doing this the best are very young, often postdoctoral or graduate students, who are going beyond their professors. I mean, this is just what I've heard. Now, I'm not involved in this myself, but there are some really interesting things that can be done now with the internet that aren't necessarily bad. A lot of the things being done on the internet are very bad, of course, but this is something that could really be useful as a way of tying, not scientists to tell us what they're thinking, but all the other people that are affected by what we do. This is called sociology, right? And so there are people that have thought about this and want to try to do what you would like to see done. How can I get involved, right? After all, nobody's going to listen to me who's a policymaker. You say to yourself, or at least I got the impression that's what you were saying to yourself. But hopefully, the people that are starting to do this sociologically in research are going to try to find ways so that we can encompass you, the general audience, to become involved in what we should do and are doing. So I think you asked the perfect question, but now we have to find a way to actually do it. But as I told, I know that there are some people in sociology that are doing this. That's all I can tell you because I'm not an expert here, but I do know about some of these studies going on. So hopefully they will find ways to do this so that we get a really good picture about this, one that's scientifically valid and not just artifacts or so forth. But it's something we don't know really how to do properly. You're right.
So we have one more question, and I'm going to ask.
Actually, I didn't say, my question was very, very similar to hers, and there was a number of times you referred to us in the audience as being involved. And my question was, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, we're trying to find ways to do this. I hope that they continue to do so. This is not my area of research, but I think it's absolutely essential that we find ways, because your opinion in this sort of thing is more important than mine. Because I'm prejudiced by my knowledge. You're not. You're prejudiced only by what you've lived your life as. So your prejudice is very different than mine, and we must know what you think. We have to. This is the major reason I give this talk. I want to convince the audience that you have to find a way to become involved. Otherwise, we're going to screw it up.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Hruby. And there are evaluations on that back table if you are interested in learning more about the upcoming Science Cafe lectures, so fall 2019, starting in October. Definitely write down my email address and you should be expecting more information soon. Thank you everyone and have a great night.
We didn't